Hello everyone and welcome to Venezuela Solidarity Campaign's YouTube channel. Today is in the latest of our series of interviews of key developments in Venezuela and the region, and we'll be talking to our campaign secretary, Dr. Francisco Dominguez, who is also a well-known writer and campaigner on a range of Latin America issues. The topic for the discussion today is the recent meeting between President Maduro of Venezuela and President Lula da Silva of Brazil, which preceded a summit meeting to which Lula had invited all 13 presidents in South America. First of all, Francisco, focusing on the meeting between Maduro and Lula, can you tell us how important this trip was for Maduro and Venezuela, please?
Yeah, I think the significance is that Lula has decided to make Brazil play a substantial international role, and has been, touring the world, as it were, making the weight of Brazil being felt. I'll comment on a little bit more on this later on. And therefore, this has been recognized by everybody internationally. All the big players, do recognize the weight of Brazil. So the very fact that Lula invited Maduro as a star guest, because that was the nature of it, even though all of them were invited equally. But Maduro had a special place because Lula organized a press conference with him, where both of them were able to actually put forward their view of what regional integration is all about and the kind of negative forces they have to fight against. And at this high-level press conference, Maduro was able to actually come out very strongly, not only as a clear-minded person, but also as a statesman. He took the high-level politics, as it were, and put forward, the crucial question that the region faces, which is, regional integration. I think Lula was the president who facilitated this and had the support of all his entourage in the Workers' Party and the Brazilian government. So very significant indeed.
What else did they talk about when they had their private meeting before the summit itself?
Well, it was we do not know all the details, but what was said by them publicly was that, for example, Lula talked about the necessity to reinvigorate the relationship between Brazil and Venezuela economically, which is going to benefit Venezuela enormously. He talked about many Brazilian companies that weren't prevented from going and intervening or investing and participating in the Venezuelan economy as a result of the sanctions during the Bolsonaro period to go back. Many of them are very keen to go back, he said. So there is going to be a flourishing relationship at the economic level. Venezuela is in a position to import a huge number of things, and Brazil has all the capacities imaginable industrially, technically, technologically, financially, and so forth. More important that he said the question that they were confronting, them both leading this process, was to actually ensure that the region integrated culturally, politically, socially, and so on. And when it came to the question of specifying the relationship that Brazil wants to establish with Venezuela, on top of all those general points, was the collaboration at the level of the border, the common border that they have, which is gigantic. And then he said there is no reason for our armed forces to actually collaborate, very strongly to fight against narco-trafficking and against crime. That was extraordinary. And this was couched by Lula in the context of his intention to restart the, Defense Council of the South, CODESUR, which was, all the defense departments, all defense ministries, and all the armed forces in the region, in UNASUR, in the Union of South American nations, collaborating together to set up a sort of their own armed forces. So nobody will have the justification or the excuse to intervene militarily because they'll have the facilities and the armies with which to deal with any problems that may arise, which is a substantial step forward in terms of the intention where Lula wants to take this to.
And the discussion that they had around Venezuela possibly joining BRICS, how did that proceed?
He, off the cuff, as it were, I don't think it was, but he came across as off the cuff. What about, you, Maduro, because he calls Maduro not Nicolas, but Maduro. What about you, Maduro, Venezuela joining BRICS? And Maduro responded enthusiastically, said, absolutely no problem at all. That would be fantastic. Of course, count on us at any time. Next day, the day after this, the Chinese Foreign Ministry and the Russian Foreign Ministry, high officials responded enthusiastically saying Venezuela is more than welcome to come in. So that is a very significant thing. In other words, it was already in. It's a question of, organizing and structuring the integration. But more important that Brazil, Lula actually managed to get Dilma Rousseff be nominated or appointed president of the new development bank, which is the Bank of the BRICS. And according to the information we have, the new development bank has a running capital of 200 billion for infrastructure, social development. So it's a huge amount of money. She's, presiding this enormous institution. So therefore, we have Brazil inviting Venezuela. Venezuela is rich in energy. One of the key dimensions of these BRICS is obviously energy. It's not the only thing, but it's energy. But it's also finances, and it's also infrastructural capabilities that they can actually bring to our economies. So Brazil is the conduit to actually bring all the capacities, all the capabilities that the BRICS have to the region. And Venezuela is going to have a privileged position on that because of the role it plays, not only in economic terms of the potential that it has, not only economically, but also politically, because there is no question about it, that whatever the problems Venezuela has been facing the last few years as a result of the massive aggression by the United States, Venezuela is seen and is perceived and is recognized as a leading player in the region as well as internationally. So Brazil wants to have that on board. And that is the significance of that dimension.
Would it also have an impact in terms of weakening the dollar, the ability, and therefore the ability of the United States to levy sanctions against a whole range of countries across the world?
Lula made it clear, he's been making this point for some time now, that he said he made a mistake not agreeing to Chavez's proposal some time ago when Chavez was around to set up a Bank of the South. He said now it has a crucial dimension. Lula, Brazil is already in conversations with Argentina to set up a common reference currency, which they call it. I think it's going to be some sort of cryptocurrency, crypto coin of some description. But the architecture of that is complex to establish. But a key point he made was that they needed something like the Bank of the South now as part of these push for regional integration. And a common currency for the whole region, the sub-region, South America in this case to start with, is going to be crucial. And he made the clear point, he said, in order not to have to depend on international currencies, meaning the dollar, and given that there is a very massive, I would say, very significant, epochal perhaps, process of de-dollarization in the world economy, this is going to significantly impair the capacity of the United States to use the dollar as a weapon against any of us in Latin America, which I think is excellent. And therefore, it's got this huge potential. And Lula is determined that this is going to be central to the whole operation, the whole regional integration that he is promoting.
Thank you. We talked earlier about, or mentioned that, that there was a summit of the South American presidents. Can you tell us a bit about that in terms of what the agenda was for that meeting that was called by Lula? Yeah,
the main agenda was pretty much, what they discussed with Maduro, which I just described. It's just to restart the process of regional integration and to bring it about as quickly as possible in order to address all the problems, all the legacies left by the neoliberal administrations that were in office for a few years, Bolsonaro being one of them. One can say, summing up, that the neoliberal administrations in the region actually in a very short period of time, wrecked their economies, or more or less all of them. In the case of Brazil, the case of Bolivia, you think of Ecuador, and so on. So this is a question that has got to be addressed. And all of the necessity to establish all the institutions that were already in place are already going to be re-established. And one of the ones which is crucial is going to be the Union of South American Nations, UNASUR, which is the one that actually played a substantial political role at the time when it was established in 2008. UNASUR was, in my view, responsible for stopping the coup d'etat against Evo Morales that was taking place at the time as a result of the extreme right wing in the eastern part of the country. So therefore, the Union of South American countries is going to be restarting. 6 presidents, from the right wing withdrew from UNASUR and made it more or less rendered it useless. It wasn't functioning. And now they're all coming back. And Colombia, Petro has already indicated he wants to rejoin. So therefore, with UNASUR, with the Bank of the South, with CODESUR, and with the dimension of the BRICS into that regional integration that Brazil brings in, I think this looks at a very, very substantial, massively qualitative, significant step forward for the region in terms of its own national economic and political independence, and to diminish as much as possible the constant US aggression, US interventionism, bringing about regime change and all the rest of it that we know.
And while Maduro was in Brazil, was he able to have conversations with other South American presidents that were successful in terms of new agreements?
Yeah, there were conversations with Alberto Fernandez, the president of Argentina. Relations are very good, they're very cordial, there is no problem, but Argentina is in a quandary at the moment because of the huge debt left by Macri, $280 billion. They're literally a grab from the throat and from somebody else, and they cannot move too much. So Fernandez was extremely careful in his conversation with Maduro, but they reiterated, what they wanted to do in terms of the region or all the general points. So there is agreement on that, but nothing specific. No signing of any specific agreement, although I think it's possible that something was done and we are going to be told later on. He had conversation with Luis Arce, president of Bolivia, and what they did was they reviewed 13 agreements that they signed in April. 13 agreements is a huge number of agreements with the countries such as Bolivia, and Bolivia is extremely rich in gas, and Venezuela is extremely rich in oil. Bolivia is extremely rich in minerals. Venezuela has some interest in minerals, not just minerals in general, but specific minerals, rare earths, which are called. Therefore, the combination of these two, is going to make things quite substantial in terms of the potential for development, interchange, trade, and everything else. I think one of the most significant from the political point of view conversations that Maduro had was with Gustavo Petro. The conversations were about how to collaborate, intensify, deepen the collaboration they have in the common border, which is also huge. I think this is going to work in 2 ways. Number one, Petro's committed himself to continue to play a substantial facilitating role in the dialogue that Maduro wants to have with all sections of the opposition. So Petro is going to continue to do this. He's already organized an international conference on this, and it's going to continue. And number two, Venezuela is crucial in supporting the peace process that Petro wants to actually ensure that it takes place in Colombia. Both processes are complex. I think the Venezuelan one is easier compared to the Colombian one. So therefore, the very fact that this big player now being projected massively by Lula and by this summit of the regional integration of the South American nations, which is President Maduro, this is going to certainly strengthen his role, his hand, in terms of helping Colombia into ensuring that there is a successful peace process in Colombia. And this means that the chances of the United States organizing wars, provocations, and so on also diminish, which is extremely important. Let's not forget, the United States has 10 military bases in Colombia, and they were all, targeting Venezuela. So now this has been not neutralized, but certainly has been blunted quite substantially at the political level. So sections of the oligarchy in Colombia are thinking that the solution to this problem, as they say, is to actually wage a coup d'etat against Petro. There again, Brazil and Maduro and Venezuela and the rest of the regionally integrated Latin American nations, South American nations can come in and prevent any nonsense from taking place, such as what the oligarchy would like to do in Colombia. So pretty good in that sense. So there were possibly other bilateral conversations, but I'm not aware of them. Certainly they haven't been reported. Just want to highlight one point which is interesting. There were elections in Paraguay recently, and the candidate of the Colorado party, the right wing, was elected. And this guy, one of the first things he did, as soon as he's elected, he announced he was going to establish fully relations with Venezuela, diplomatic, commercial, and every kind of relationship. And he was interviewed by a Peruvian magazine or other magazines, and this was reproduced all over the place. And he said there is only one president in Venezuela, and that president is called Nicolás Maduro. So that's very interesting. In other words, Paraguay realizes that the actual pragmatic attitude to take is to participate fully in this regional integration. And unless you have good relations with Venezuela, you're not going to be part of it. So this was quite an important, sort of emblematic event, I think, that I wanted to mention.
Absolutely. I mean, overall, how would you rate the significance of that summit? I mean, clearly there were some major advances that were made, but taking the long view about it.
Yeah, I mean, the United States counteroffensive that began in 2009, although they never stopped organizing aggression, but it was sort of successful from 2009 all the way to 2019, where they were able to, I'm going to summarize by getting rid of several of the progressive governments in the region, coup d'etat, lawfare, elections, destabilization, whatever. This process didn't produce substantial results from the point of view of the consolidation politically of the right wing. So we have been able to recover quite substantially. That's number one. Number two, the fact that Lula came back to office, that's reinvigorated massively, as already said, the process of regional integration. I think this process of regional integration is going to continue from the south all the way up to the north. It's going to include Central America, the Caribbean, and certainly Mexico. So this is extremely important. And now that they know that they have the necessity to have some financial mechanisms of themselves to be able to deal with any possible aggression in the future, plus the connection that the whole region will have then with the BRICS and the rising Asian economies, the emerging economies, then this is going to massively strengthen the economic independence of the whole region, and it's going to massively diminish the capacity of the United States to intervene. More importantly, from the political point of view, is that Maduro is back. I mean, Lula said it, Maduro is back. And that means that Venezuela has been totally vindicated. I think it will send a very good message to anybody in the world, certainly in Latin America. Principle resistance pays off. You can resist, you must resist. There is no guarantee you're going to win. But if you do resist, then you might end up like, in this situation that we are now, which is very promising, very auspicious. But if you don't fight back, if you don't resist, there is guarantee you're going to be crushed, because the United States is relentless, is totally brutal and merciless. And this is the enemy we're dealing with, because it's an enemy that is very aggressive and is declining quite massively. So that aggressiveness is increasing exponentially as a consequence of their decline. So therefore, this is absolutely the right thing to do right now to make sure that we're prepared in the event that the United States were to go crazy, which is possible, but not certain. And if, on the other hand, the United States comes to the conclusion that it's time that they recognize that they are not the enormous power and huge power that used to be in the past, and are prepared to talk to any of our governments, I'm convinced our government is going to say, yes, of course, let's collaborate, let's talk to each other, let's have trade, let's have negotiations of any kind. But once we disagree, and if we disagree, we hope that you stop trying to assassinate our presidents, organizing coup d'etat, and bring about regime change. So in that sense, that has massively been strengthened. And more importantly, finally, is the question of multipolarity. There is a multipolar world that is emerging. In my personal view, the United States is deliberately organizing wars all over the place, provocations of the military kind, disruption of every kind, in order to actually fight against multipolarity. Because he knows that multipolarity is where diversity is going to predominate, and therefore it itself will not be able to actually maintain by force the supremacy it has been able to maintain up to now. So therefore, the fact that Latin America is such a crucial economically, politically, and socially region in the world, but certainly in that hemisphere, that actually take that step, to restart regional integration with all the contents that we just discussed, then it's definitely a huge victory for multipolarity. So I will end up by saying long live multipolarity rather than only long live Venezuela.
Thank you very much, Francisco. That's grand.
Thank you. My pleasure. It's great to be able to bring good news to people.